So how does one cast a vision? Is it like casting a line into the river, trying to catch a fish, a little bait, a good spot, a lot of waiting? Or is it like casting a hit show, auditioning possibilities until something clicks? This question is from the book Upcycle Your Congregation, Creative Ideas for Transforming Faith Communities, edited by Sarah Lambert. Each month this year, we've been exploring one of our vision statements or end statements, and these statements were created from workshops with all of you where images of our future and naming what is present now arose and were crafted into solid statements by the Board of Trustees. Today, we're considering the statement in our MSUS community across all ages. We discern our individual and collective work for justice and pursue that work with courage. Lisa's reading lifted up the process of discernment, of noticing, pondering, and interpreting our experience in the light of our faith or the values of this shared community, listening for that still small voice, which for some is the voice of God, and others is the voice of conscience or longing or compassion or love. The authors of that book describe the act of discernment as a set of attitudes and practices by which we willingly open our hearts to our own individual desire, the desire of the community or the congregation, and the desire of something greater than ourselves. If the notion of that language of God is not what fits your theology, then just think of it as, where is love calling you and us? This feels right to me because to eliminate any of these three elements from the act of discernment feels a little lopsided and incomplete to me. We who have found this church to be our own have found ourselves called to Unitarian Universalism. We choose to gather and worship in small groups. We choose to create music together and learn and do service together for many reasons. But at the core, we each have an answer to the question, what do you really want most from being part of a congregation? What do you really want most from being part of this congregation? I know my answer to the question of being part of UU congregations has changed over the years. Initially, my answer was about creating loving stability for Linda and I, who had no community beyond a few close friends when we moved to Minnesota in 1991. Through the years, the answer to this question, what do you want most from being part of the community, has shifted. There were years when I wanted my community to rise up against marriage inequality, against racial injustice, against the violence that we see on our streets. At this point, my congregational life helps me stay accountable to my spiritual practices and grounding so that I can be my best self. And it helps me bring more courage and compassion into the world. It's about joining with others who continue to learn and grow and understand our changing world. It's about being able together to see an increase of the visibility of marginalized groups and to open my eyes to systemic white supremacy that has left all of us scarred in its wake. Life in a congregation is a shared life. It's a shared ministry that's always evolving. And ideally, it is seeking a way to be more relevant in our lives and in the lives of others, especially Unitarian Universalism, which is an evolving faith. As we say to one another in the moms group, at the end of every moms group, even virtually, I take your hand so that we may do together what I cannot do alone. We can always do more together than what we can do alone. So we are all story keepers and storytellers of this congregation. It doesn't matter how long you've been here. You could have been here the longest or just arrived, but we all have subjective stories about Michael Servetus Unitarian Society. My sense is that on an individual level, the stories of this church are poignant and moving, transformative and compelling. Some of you may scoff at this, thinking your story is none of those, but these stories inside us may take some coaxing or time of personal discernment, but I can tell you that through my 5 years here, I have heard and seen such stories emerge over and over again. Why else would you continue to come and stay engaged? But what about the desires of the community of this church? If you read our 9 end statements, it is evident that the desires of this community are varied and they're complex and they're aspirational. I constantly go back to something I read a long time ago, which is that at a large church, you have the core group of leaders who set a course and a large number of people who go along with the plan. But in a small church like ours, you have 100 members and 100 different opinions. And instead of being a top-down type of church with multiple ministers and staff leading the way, along with congregational leaders, we are a bottom-up church. Without hierarchical layers, voices are easily expressed and heard. I see this as a unique gift of a small congregation, and sometimes it is hard to acknowledge all the voices and not end up stuck in a place of wanting to please everyone and becoming immobilized for fear of conflict. Today, after this service, we will have a meeting about our building on Oakley Avenue. We will hear back from the architects about what they heard with our sessions with us. And instead of asking, what do you really want most from being part of this congregation? Actually, that should be part of the question. Also ask, what do you really want from this building? And when I think about that, I don't mean like to idolize this building to the point that we lose who we are, but that we turn from our strengths and we focus on we turn from our strengths and instead of focusing on our shortcomings, and that we don't allow a sense of scarcity and fear to keep us from moving forward in whatever direction that may be. All this discernment, whether it's about social justice or the building, it's just real right now. If we return to the visionary statement, which is the focus of today's service, in our MSUS community, across all ages, we discern individual and collective work for justice and pursue that work with courage. There are elements of building and space where we gather and we welcome newcomers and communities that enter the building for tax assistance or voting or weddings or memorial services. There are elements of our space that include decisions based deeply held values. And I don't mean the value of the building or the value of our savings. The values I am speaking of are those of justice that call us to create a gathering space which is as open and inclusive as possible, and ideally that can serve the community beyond our walls. What might we do beyond hosting tax assistance in polling places? Maybe we could see our building as an asset, not just for us, but for the community organizations that may need an office periodically, or a place where performances or meetings intended for the broader community could take place. Maybe we could be a place that hosts the annual Martin Luther King breakfast or large community conversations. Discernment is that process of breaking open and listening. It's a process of not just jumping to a quick conclusion, but breathing into a deeper wonder, longing, possibility, and calling. When discernment is done as a community that seeks to bring more love, commitment, and justice into the world, it requires attitudes and practices that transcend our own personal desires. Attitudes and practices that move us from the me to the we. That book, Upstart Your Congregation, includes a passage like this. All congregations come with a story. There can be a sense of lore around it, something well practiced and honed over time into a tale that is increasingly mythical and completing. A healthy church has healthy antidotes, stories of love, courage, laughter, and of the good long journeys across the wilderness places. And churches with unhealthy patterns, on the other hand, tell other kinds of antidotes, one that encourage distrust, fear, a sense of embattlement. The second story is a problem-centered story. The story of social justice at MSUS is mixed. Our founders speak of members of this church being influential in the city of Fridley. One of our deceased members was pivotal in getting the recycling program implemented in Fridley. Several of our members served on the board of Springbrook Nature Center and were instrumental in a significant expansion and enhancements of that park. Another launched a Buy Black campaign over 50 years ago, which sought to encourage people to patronize Black-owned businesses by publishing a list of such businesses in the Minneapolis area. This is part of our history and continues to be. Today, we have lawyers who consistently take pro bono cases to improve the life of children and families. We have congregants who serve on community boards who offer their personal stories for mission-based videos of organizations. We have congregants who give blood regularly for years and who attend transformative circles held in Anoka. We also have regular volunteers with the Fridley Public School projects and Deliver Meals on Wheels, and those who are connected to SACA, which Lori spoke about today. We have been and are a community with many civic-minded people, people who are willing to serve the community, better the lives of others, advocate for those who are on the margins. Sometimes such actions are fueled by or are a reflection of people's Unitarian Universalist faith, and sometimes it's just something we do, disconnected from this life we share here. What this vision statement we are exploring today emphasizes is that, but not just that. It is also about corporate and institutional purpose and action. It's about the we. I know that when this congregation was in the interim period after Reverend Dana Reynolds served and prior to my arrival, the interim minister, Reverend Karen Gustafson, led the congregation through a discernment process about social action. This statement was in the 2016 Congregational Record, which was a document that describes the church to potential ministerial candidates when I was looking at potentially serving this church. The statement said, our social action committee hosted a social justice empowerment workshop led by our interim minister last year, and are following up with a plan for involving volunteers in education, service, witness, and advocacy around economic and environmental justice. That was a big mouthful, so let me just repeat a part of it. They said that there was a plan for involving volunteers in education, service, witness, and advocacy around economic and environmental justice. Little did they know that in 2016, our world would shift. Our country would elect a president who launched his campaign and presidency with an anti-immigrant statement and policies. We didn't know of the deaths of Jamar Clark and Philando Castile and George Floyd, all within miles of our church, and how they would spark local and national outrage about police misuse of power and white supremacy. How are we to know that Standing Rock, the Me Too movement, the escalation of ICE deportations and separations of family from their children, and this purposeful creation of distrust that had divided our country would emerge over these past 5 years? Over these years, we have continued to recognize how justice, the economy, history, housing, employment, and more are problematic in our local, national, and global communities. I know there are times when those of you who were part of that process around social justice in 2015 look back and you feel like you have failed. Social justice in this community often arises as a problem-centered story, one that focuses on what we haven't or what we can't do. Today, I'm going to ask you to stop that narrative and instead understand how rapidly our world has shifted in the last 5 years. My goodness, we will never be the same, even after this last year of the pandemic alone. And still, this congregation has remained deeply faithful to our relationships with our long-term community partners. This year, I've had the opportunity to begin some one-on-one conversations, which are the core of community organizing, with folks in the Anoka County area who are helping me understand what is going on beyond our walls. I think I foolishly came from St. Paul and Minneapolis and thought the church would just fall into all the movements there. And honestly, I think we need to remain more local in the Anoka County area, closer to our church. That's a big shift. It takes a while to learn that kind of stuff together. As I mentioned last week, I've been approached by a volunteer with the UU Service Committee who leads their congregational accompaniment project for asylum seekers program. It's called CAPAS, always acronyms, because there may be a father who will be local, who might need housing and services for himself and his son who has been in the United States as he's awaiting reunification with his father. So let me tell you what I witnessed last Sunday as Reverend Laura Randall spoke of the UUSC and the Asylum Seekers Program. I saw one congregant come forward sharing that she speaks fluent Spanish and is knowledgeable about county resources. Another volunteered their home as a potential location for the father and son to live. Others named additional resources available throughout our congregation that could support a father and son as they make their way through legal, social, and psychological needs during their time in the CAPAS program. Here's the deal. We may not be needed if the father doesn't come. We'll learn more in the weeks and months ahead. The house that was graciously lifted up may not be acceptable because the basement doesn't have egress windows. The father and son could end up in a county different than the one that our congregant is most knowledgeable about. And you know what? None of it matters when it comes to what I want to say right now. What I want to say is that I saw a level of willingness, generosity, hopefulness, and purpose emerge in a matter of an hour. I watched as a group of you began to imagine, actually you went further than that. You envisioned our congregation wrapping an unknown father and son with support and resources and love. And in that brief flash that may or may not actually realize, I saw us as the congregation that lives into our vision with humility and tenacity and a spirit that accentuates the we. That's a congregation that is already known from those within us in the congregation. One thing I'm noticing is that we seem to do better when we can connect with an outside organization that can help carry part of the load. Just think of the past year with Moose Jaw, Minnesota UU Social Justice Alliance, and UU The Vote. So many of us wrote postcards in 2 waves of voter engagement. And I think of last week with the possibility of UUSC helping us understand what would be required to support a father and his son and guide and support him through that process. I refuse to let the problematic story be the story that moves us forward. I actually believe we have to release ourselves from this paralyzing state of needing to know everything before we begin, of this state that we believe that we kind of have to focus on just 1 or 2 things and that it has to be the right thing before we can begin. Or we're worrying about doing too much, so instead we do nothing. Any action we take, small or large, will provide information for where we might go next or what might call us next. Mistakes, successes, relationships that grow, and relationships that go nowhere at all are all a part of the process of moving out in the community and in finding our ways into living out our values of justice in the surrounding area. Have faith, my friends, faith in the work that is ahead, faith that we will be transformed by every risk and commitment we make. I see us as a community that will become more alive as we share our love and compassion and longing for justice beyond our walls. I hope you share the same enthusiasm and belief. I don't have a specific question. I'm wondering about this. I guess I have a pondering about whether you think we have been sort of stuck in this problem-based story, and if you too can see inklings of us moving to a different story, a story of risk and courage and being willing to try take those little steps or big ones. So I will open up the opportunity for people to speak, and Ben can call on people or read comments, and we will go from there. Lynn found it at least beautiful, true, and powerful. So I'm glad about that. Maybe we can restory this moment in our lives. Come on, you. I know there's a number of you who have been in this, I don't know, maybe feeling discouraged or reflecting differently on the past years. I see Marie.
I'd like to say last week I was in the small group after the service where the person volunteered their house. And right then I said, I think this is a move forward in a way that we have not moved forward sometimes. So that gave me a lot of hope. And afterwards, I really started thinking about what do I need to do to get more involved? And so I'm really glad last week happened, and I think it's going to give me the impetus to continue.
Thank you. And I will bring Dottie. Dottie introduced herself at the beginning of the service last week. She's she's a UU minister who's retired and who is committed to this program, the asylum program. So she'll come and talk to us more about what's happening. It sounds like with the current government and negotiations with families that have been separated, there are some rocky conversations at the moment. So we really don't know around timing what might happen. Thank you, Marie. I can see your emotion just even sharing today. So thank you.
Did I see a hand over in the Norma and Marilyn household? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
So this is Marilyn, and it was a very uplifting what you said, Reverend Laura, but what keeps coming into my mind as these conversations take place is the bottom line financial costs, and it just really weighs heavy on me. So that's all. Will
you say more about the bottom line financial cost? Are you talking about with the building or with social justice or with what?
Kind of with all of that, they're with the building, I think it's huge. With helping people, it brings me back to, I get my head wrapped up into too much, all of the children that were, that are still missing.
Yep.
And instead of, like you're talking about, one man, one child, and that, you help one pebble, right? Versus all the rocks on the beach. But yeah, I get tied up in that.
Thank you. That starfish story, right? Like, does it matter? Toss it back into the water and say it matters for that one. Yeah. It is overwhelming, Marilyn. I mean, I really hear you, and I think it's easy to remain in that place. But I also did feel like when we were writing postcards, those of us who were, sitting with these stacks and writing these little notes on these little pieces of paper, that there was kind of this prayer, this wish, this moment with each strike of the pen that something may be different because of our actions. Ben, was there a message that went in?
There is, and I also see Janice's hand, but I'll read the message quick. Pamela says, I would love to help in some way. I also have a spare room and bath in my house. Perhaps I might have a person who needs it as a refuge from her marriage in a couple of months. Go ahead, Janice.
I'm Janice Sancott. I've been a member since the mid-1990s, and one of my frustrations with MSUS, and it is with where I used to work at Parkview Center School, is that we had what I would call the crises of the year. We would deal with something, homelessness, whatever, and then the following year we would drop out of that particular organization and go on to something else. And I've never really felt a connection because there's so many different things that we were trying to tackle. And I tend to take more of a starfish approach to things. And that is, you're walking along the beach and you're throwing back the starfish, which making a difference to that starfish. But when you get to the end of that stretch of beach, you've helped a lot of starfish. And it would be hard for me to go the next year not helping more starfish.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like to take what's called a scattershot approach to something. I'm more in favor of picking a few things and making a big difference in that part.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm probably explaining this very poorly, but
No, you're explaining something that's been articulated over the years. And so what I may challenge us to think about is if there's folks who are really feel like, I want that deep, long ongoing, it's like, so how to generate some energy around that. It may not be a congregational consensus. We don't have to all have consensus about something, but to begin something, to grow that relationship. And we have a couple relationships that have been with us for a long period of time. And, I guess I'm really feeling this shift from, we only have so much to, like, let's just begin. And if that's the place we'll dive deep and stay, great. The world will keep changing and we are going to have to respond. So I think it's going to have to be both. And, I think it's a great thing to lift up, Janice, and I hear you.
I think I'll add something real quick. A couple weeks ago, I was listening to a podcast about the new book out, The Infinite Game, I think it's called. But they were talking about, so related to this, Reverend Laura used the word faith a little bit ago. And then there's this, I sometimes think things are overwhelming and you feel like you're going it alone, and there's how much difference can you make? And there was a statement in this conversation that said a definition of faith is that you're on a team even when you don't know your teammates. And so sometimes the work you're doing, there's other people out there doing it, even if you can't see them doing it. And so not to forget that.
Ben, that gave me like goosebumps. It's beautiful. Thank you for adding that.